All right, and welcome back to another episode of Catching Colorado. And I'm going to show you today how to tie up this absolutely amazing ladybug. And the cool thing about this ladybug that's not like the rest is it has a hard shell. And I've been looking to try and make a hard shell ladybug for a long time. And I think I've come up with the perfect way to do it. So let's get started. All right, so I always tie these on a curved hook. I think, honestly, unless you're fishing a really picky water, you could probably get away with a 16, 14 size. If you're fishing maybe a pickier water, you might want to go a little bit finer. But the hook that I'm using today is a TMC 2457, and this is in size 16. I would probably tie these in 16, 14, and 12. That would be probably the main sizes I would go with. And after loading up this into the vise, I'm going to start by using a UTC 70 denier black thread. And I'm going to start about an eye length, maybe an eye length and a half behind the hook eye. And then we're going to trim the thread off, and we're going to work our way back down the hook. I like to take this a little bit down the bend. I don't like to go super far because I want to keep in mind that we are, going to have a pretty big piece of foam here. So I don't want the fish to not have a ton of surface area of that hook to get snagged on. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim a piece of 2mm black foam. And my goal in trimming this is to make it a little wider than the hook gap. This is a little bit too wide. If I flip it around though, that's about perfect. So a little bit wider than the hook gap, but not the hook gap, right? You want something that's just a little bit wider. So I'm just trimming up my piece of foam here to kind of match all the way down. And what we're going to do is lay that foam. You could tie a little hook in here if you want. I don't. I like just using the whole piece of foam because it's just giving me a little bit more float. Not going to need a ton of float with this fly. It's not particularly heavy. But I like to have that little bit extra float. So I am going to really work down this foam. I want to get it nice and tight. So I'm going to work down that foam, and then I'm going to come up to here about the same spot we started, and then work back. And we're going to work that thread all the way to the back of that foam and let our thread dangle. Now, this is where a lot of people will use peacock herl. I think you absolutely can, but I've tied up so many mysis in my life that I have become a bigger fan of ostrich herl. So I have some black dyed ostrich herl here, and I've just pulled one feather from the shank, and then I'm going to clean up the end a little bit so that we can tie it in just a bit easier. And then we're going to use this for the legs of the fly. And I just like how it splays out a little bit better. Some peacock herls don't give you the most surface area, and I just like how this looks. So I'm going to lay that on the back of the hook, and we're going to give it a couple wraps there, and then we're going to progress our thread all the way forward to where we started. And then I'm just going to move that bobbin down a little bit, and while turning the vise towards myself, I'm going to build a very dense ostrich herl leg pattern here. So I don't care about what this looks like on the top because it's going to get foam over it, but I do want it to have a pretty dense amount of legs on that underside. If you ever flipped a ladybug over, they do kind of look a little fuzzy on the underneath side. So that's kind of the goal here. The reason we're trying to get that foam tight is because of this process. When you are working that ostrich forward, it's you don't really want it to slip off without being able to get a nice turn in there. So I'm getting close to the head here. I'm not going to stop, just keep turning and getting a little bit more legs in there. And then I'll do one securing wrap, two, and then I can really lock it down and I can snip that ostrich free from the hook. This extra stuff's no big deal. If you want, you can trim it out. Sometimes I'll burn it out, but it's not really going to cause you any issues. You can also just hold it back and then kind of get a couple wraps in there. So we want to move our thread back to that kind of eye length or so behind, maybe an eye and a half behind. And then we're going to fold the foam over and we are going to get a giant loose wrap in there. And this is where we're going to kind of be centering our bug up. So just working on centering it here. And then I'm going to start wrapping pretty tightly. And we want to get this thing looped around the hook pretty good here, just to get a good lock on that foam. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this very close. So you can use, if you flip your scissors over, you can use the curve of the scissors to kind of get two cuts on it that almost taper with the body. And sometimes that can be the best way to do it. I like a little bit of foam sticking out because what we're going to do is we are going to just basically build up a little head here. And we're going to use the foam to start that. But if I turn it sideways, you'll see no ladybug really looks like that with that super, super skinny head. So we're going to have to add some dubbing, which is our next material, a super fine rabbit dubbing. This is in black. So I guess this is just the rabbit version, but it's a really fine dubbing too, just like the super fine would be. And you are gonna, when I say like the smallest noodle possible, I mean the smallest noodle possible. You're gonna do just a very tiny amount. Like I think I even grabbed too much there. You're gonna do a very tiny amount on the thread. So that's probably not long enough, but that's the thickness that we want it. Super, super thin. So I did grab just about the right amount there. So something super thin like that. And then we are going to just build up a little head here. So nothing too crazy, but we are going to build up a head. And I'm just going to kind of pull some of that dubbing back so that we can get a nice tie-in point on the hook eye here. Don't want to plug up. I'm going to back it up. Got just a little too much on there. So that's a little better so that we can get it really locked in mostly behind that eye. And then don't worry about all this frivolous stuff. That's not really too big of a deal. And then we are going to get a couple turn whip finish in here. And I start right behind the hook eye. And then I kind of let that turn work up the head of the ladybug. And then once you get it pulled down there, you can go ahead and snip that line free from the bug. And then you can come in here and you can just kind of trim up some of the wispies. None of this is really going to matter, but I'll show you why I'm doing that in a minute. So there's your tied bug. Now, you know it's black right now. We are going to change that very, very soon. Basically, I have tried everything. Foam, EVA foam specifically, is really hard to get clear and hard. You can use different things, but most of it will just come off right away. So this is the best way I've figured out to do this. I'm going to start with Loon UV Knot Sense, and I'm just going to put a little dab on the back. I do not want too much of this on here. The goal for this is to basically set yourself a base coat. And so what I'm doing is using a bodkin to move this around the foam and push it into the pores of the foam. So foam is very porous. That's why you're able to manipulate it so well. And I want to get this on the sides of the foam, on the top of the foam, on the back of the foam. And I'm just twisting it and using my bodkin to kind of push all of it around. If you get a little on the head, it's not a big deal. Later we're going to put a little bit on there as well. So it's not a big deal at all. So I think that looks pretty good. Just making it kind of shiny, just getting it all spread out. It also helps with the curing process. So now that I'm curing this, it's going to put like a nice coating on that foam to prepare for the coloring. So we're just going to kind of maybe stick with this UV light a little bit longer on each of these processes, just so that we get it nice and set up. Usually it doesn't take very long for this stuff to set, but again, it's a porous material, so I just want to make sure that we're getting a hard surface. You can kind of feel it, see if it's sticky, see if it's, if you got any grime on your fingers, then maybe you can just hit it with the lamp a little bit longer. But in general, this UV knot sense should dry fairly hard. It's not going to be extremely hard, but you'll have definitely a smooth body to it. So once you get that done, next is going to come the coloring. Now, I tried a whole bunch of different colors. There is a $6 Halloween pack of gel nail polish on Amazon, and this is the one that I'm using. It's number 191. There's a QR code there if you want to scan it. But this seems to be the closest to the ladybugs in my area. I think a lot of people tie them in red because that's just what we see all the time. But my ladybugs here are kind of an off orange, or an orangier color. So what I'm going to do is get a very tiny amount of this nail polish, and I'm going to start working it around the body. Now this is important that you don't get it on the head here, because it'll be very hard to correct for that. But we're just building it on the shell. So I like to get the whole top of the shell done, ladybug shell. And again, I'm trying to go thinner here. We don't need it super, super thick. It will dry better if it's not super thick. So I'm just kind of working it around, and I'm making sure that I'm getting this inside here too. So just the lip of the shell. Kind of helps, I think, with durability, because it's sort of wrapping your coating around the edges of the shell. So I'm going to work it back this way, and I'm going to sort of get it on this side too. Again, not super concerned if I get it in a few of those ostrich hurls. We got enough legs on it to really mimic a real bug. So I think that's about good right there. Now you could do multiple coats if you want. I found that one coat works perfect for me. But basically now all I have to do is hit this with the UV light as well. So I'm going to hit that with UV, and this is the longest part for the UV. So I'm going to hit this for almost a full minute. All right, that's probably the most painful part of the whole fly. And then I like to just touch it just to verify how it is or isn't dry. But you'll notice that when I do, it will kind of knock down the sheen on the bug. So it's not as shiny after I touch it. And then I kind of hit it one more time just to help toughen it up just a hair. And this is just to prepare it for the next step. I don't need it to be shiny yet. This isn't the finished product. This is just getting close to the finished product. So I just want a very cured surface here. So again, just hitting it a little bit longer. That should be about good. All right, so I'm gonna touch it, make sure I got a decent surface. I do. And then I'm gonna get a very fine point Sharpie, and I'm gonna turn this bug to me, and I'm gonna put a line basically right down the center of the back. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do kind of 2 half moon shapes on either side, kind of coming down the side of the bug, sort of like that. Nothing crazy. Then ladybugs actually don't have a ton of spots. So I usually do like 3 to 4 spots a side. If your marker gets a little funky, just hit it on some paper and then come back, hit your spots again. Having a little bit of trouble with this marker here. There we go. So now we've got some spots on the back of the bug. And now I'm going to give this thing some time to dry. Hit it again with the UV light and just really let that Sharpie kind of sit for a second. It's important because we are going to put a final coat on this, and we don't want a ton of bleeding from that Sharpie, which is definitely possible with this next step. So I'm just going to make sure that I give it a little bit extra time to dry. Kind of hit that Sharpie. You can blow on it. There we go. And I think that's looking pretty good. Last step, Solarez Bone Dry. The stuff is amazing, how hard it dries and how quickly it dries. I cannot emphasize enough, you do not want to use a lot of this. You want to keep it nice and neat, super thin. So I'm just kind of brushing it over the top of this pattern and just getting a little bit of a hard shell look to it, and then I'm going to be done. I will touch up the head. So like I was saying, we do hit the head at one point. This not only secures the fly a little bit better, but I've never seen a fuzzy-headed ladybug. They always have kind of that very hard shell looking head. So now that we've got the Bone Dry Solarez on there, I'm going to tap the light to finish this off. So just tapping, not going to try to give it a ton of light right away. Just want to give it a second to try to cure. And you could do this if you decided you wanted to. You could do this in reverse order, and you could do the Solarez first. The Solarez does tend to bleed the dots a little bit, but what I've found is if you look up most ladybugs online, they have sort of a bleeded looking dot. They're not perfect, you know, if you look at a real one, right? So I'm not so concerned. The fish aren't going to be looking at the back as much. They're more going to care about what's underneath the fly in that ostrich hurl. So Solarez, it dries really fast, so this thing is already cured. And that is just about as hard of a shell as you're going to get right there. And that is a completed ladybug pattern. So absolutely beautiful. It's the size of a ladybug. It has the look of a ladybug. And it's not, you know, artificial in color. Here's another one that I did with a little bit finer dots on it. But either way, those are, you know, kind of the best I've come up with for a ladybug pattern, and they work fantastic. You can see just kind of how fine that hook gap is between the foam and the hook gap. So that's the only thing you want to kind of be aware of, is how much you're covering up with the foam. But the ostrich hurl is very pliable, and when that fish takes a bite, more than undoubtedly going to hook them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this pattern. If you have any questions, leave the comments down below. Any suggestions I will take as well. And if there's any flies in the future that you'd like me to tie up, please let me know. Thanks so much for watching on Catching Colorado Fly Tying.
Thanks for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in more relatable content, you can check out these videos right here. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe down below so you can stay updated on our next adventures.